Welcome to our newest adventure for first responder wellness. No one fights alone. In-depth conversations about mental health and culture in the first responder space. We're joined by your co-hosts Austin Pedersen and Brad Shepard.
Austin, my friend, we're back again. How you doing, bro?
I'm just excited for Lisa.
Me too.
And with her pink bandages and her badge, she even wore a badge.
I was in the house. I have to wear my badge in the house, or so
Yeah.
I have been instructed.
Yeah, you're supposed to. Brad, did
I
you wear
have
your
mine.
badge?
Look at this.
Yeah.
We were all
This
badged.
picture
We were all
from
This is as closest to badged up as
My
I get
ID
anymore.
badge picture is from like 30 feet away.
That's a better picture than the one you had before that was super close and underneath you. Remember that one?
Where it just saw my chin.
Maybe. It's okay. Mine actually is from when I hadn't accepted being bald yet. So I have no hair on the top and some hair on the sides.
Welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you.
So glad you're here.
I'm glad I'm here too.
Introduce yourself again for some of the new listeners. Maybe a little bit of your background and where you came from. Your wonderful years of service with
Salt
Takeoff.
Lake City PD. My name's Lisa, and I am a retired law enforcement officer from the state of Utah. Retired as a lieutenant from Salt Lake City PD about 2 years ago. And yeah, born and raised here in Utah. Went on to serve my community for 3 decades. Managed to survive that somewhat intact. And now I am happily retired and hanging out with you guys.
Love having you here. How hard was it to get your leadership spot in Salt Lake City? I'm always curious to know people's mindsets with promotion and then the kind of the culture of any given agency. Was it hard, or did you promote late in your career? Did you like working the road? Did you like your leadership?
So I did promote late in my career because I had a disciplinary issue come up when I was a sergeant.
Haven't we all?
Yes. We can debate the fairness of it, but long story short,
Sure.
I had a jaywalker run across the road on my green light, and I managed to tag him, and apparently that makes it
Fucking jaywalkers.
preventable. And because I was a hard charging cop, I had other wrecks that were my fault, but we had progressive discipline at the time, and I don't think anybody thought of it when I was disciplined for it, because 2 years later I went to promote, and everybody realized that I was not able to promote because of that fifth one.
Okay, so what happened?
Because
exactly?
I had a suspension without pay.
No, I mean exactly what happened to the.
Oh, with the accident?
Yeah.
Oh, so
Did you like swerve at him?
no, I literally stopped at a red light. It was after a Bees ball game. I looked both
so it's
ways.
packed.
I watched my light turn green, and unbeknownst to me, some drunk dude started running from my left, and I couldn't see him coming. So I went through the green light, and somebody dropped some dude on my car. Scared the crap out of me. He popped up, had the drunk face, ran away, and I was sitting there left, not only confused, but thinking, I'm so fired right now. Like, where'd that guy come from? I didn't know. I didn't know if he
All
fell off
fun
a
and games
building.
until a drunk guy ends up on your hood.
Now I
Yeah.
know why I got a jaywalker ticket in Salt Lake City.
Right.
Now
Yeah,
I know.
maybe that was
Cracking down on
karma.
those jaywalkers, man.
Yeah.
You know, jaywalkers, that was one of my best stops, actually, when I was a patrol cop, was jaywalking. I got a lot of felons and wanted murderers with a jaywalk stop.
Okay, so the real question then, what kind of jokes came at you from the jaywalker incident?
You know, actually none, because
Oh,
most
my
most
word,
of the
I'm so
guys, after
disappointed in
all
you.
were said and done, they were actually they knew I'd gotten a raw deal
Mm.
with it. Even the trooper wrote in his notes, smart trooper, unlike most of them, Brad.
Thank you. I
You're
received
welcome.
that.
He actually put in his notes that he had been instructed by a watch commander to not write this guy a ticket, and that would have been what made the difference between a preventable and not preventable. So long story short, I should have been a sergeant 8 years prior to the time I actually did promote. Promoting in our department, is it hard as far as having the opportunity to do so? No, we're a pretty big department. We are the largest, other than I think the sheriff's office, in the state of Utah. So there's lots of opportunity to promote. The process is difficult. It's very competitive. We have some very good people, and you know, I had the privilege of competing against them, and it was close.
Sure.
So yeah, I promoted very late in my career. And then once I became a sergeant, I'd done that, went back to patrol for about 8 months, and then I got a little cocky and basically walked in the chief and said, "Hey, or no, actually, it was the executive officer and said, you need to get out of my chair." And I was joking. Next thing I know, he promotes, and the chief of police comes to me and says, "I want you to be my XO." And I'm thinking, what have I done to myself? But that was the most aggravating, most stressful, but also the most amazing look I could have possibly had at the running of a police department, both locally and nationally, that you couldn't have gotten that in any other way. So I'm incredibly thankful for the experience, and also taught me that I never want to be a police chief.
Right.
Like the way you get pulled in all kinds of different directions, no one's ever happy. It was just very difficult. So I, new chief came in, he brought his own person, so I kind of got not really fired, but just unexo'd.
Sure.
They
Well, that's
offered
part
me,
of it, right?
yeah,
Your police chief needs an XO that
yeah, I get it,
is
I
an
get it.
extension of them.
Especially
Yeah.
where my chief went out under circumstances that weren't ideal, and I
Sure.
think I just got lumped in with that politically.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion
Just
because I
part
was a
of
good
it.
XO. But
Yeah.
anyway, I was given the opportunity to do policy and procedure for a while, so I got to do that. Went over and learned how to do requests for proposal processes over the city. So I mean, I kind of stayed at that same level, which is more like a deputy chief level, for a few years, and then
What an incredible opportunity.
oh yeah,
Really, to look. I mean, go from a 5,000 foot view, 10,000 foot view, maybe, to now you're 30,000 foot view, hovering back and forth, kind of up and down, and seeing. Did you have trouble communicating to the frontline officers? Then did you become disconnected? I would guess that
yes.
I would see you being a good balancer of that, but there's no doubt you had to become the other side.
Thank you. Yeah. I tried, but there's so much work. Yeah, I can see where admin does get disconnected because the what you're concerned about is completely different.
Sure.
You know, as a sergeant, my primary concern was a squad of 6 to 8 guys and getting them home safe every night. That was it. That
Right.
was my
Right.
view. And how does my squad contribute to the larger mission of this police department? And then you go to that executive level spot, and now you're running not only the entire department, how do we function as a whole, all these parts coming together, how do we serve the greater community, how do we interact with the city, how do we interact with government entities. So it was very different, and the work itself became so busy that, yeah, you just get busy and you never get back down there. But you're right, you do have that trust to be like, why is the chief's office down on the detective floor? And and you say, I'm just here to visit. They're like, yeah, huh, right. So there's that level of suspicion, which is pretty hard to overcome. But I just tried to just be me, and I've always been me, even as a supervisor. I am who you see is what you get most of the time with me.
Is this before or after peer support?
This was before peer support. So I mean, I was part of peer support when it first started.
Which was
right about 2010, 2011, if I
Yeah,
recall
yeah.
correctly. That's when we actually had a formal program. We had a TIC team before, Trauma Incident Corps. That's what we really started way back in the mid 90s. Baby peer support is what I would call that. But we didn't have an actual program until probably, I want to say, 10 or 11. And I was in a PIO at the time, and I was a peer supporter, so I was part of the
Mhm.
program. But the actual building the program didn't come till later. So the peer support thing came actually after that. I did the policy and procedure for a while, and they decided to eliminate that position.
Mm.
And oddly enough, now it's an entire unit.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, I told them at the
How
time. I
many
learned a
people?
lot.
That happens all the time.
Yeah, I learned a
Mhm.
lot, but the chief, to his credit, he didn't just shove me out somewhere. The executive officer at the time that had replaced me had come to me and said, if you had any place in the department, where would you go? And I said,
Peer support.
I want the peer support team. I
Sure.
want to build a program. And that was problematic because at the time the thinking was is you never have someone in charge that has rank, right? Because rank doesn't work. Well, we have to start somewhere. Rank can work. I mean, peer support has always been, you
It's
try to
interesting
take the rank out
watching-
of it.
Right? It's interesting watching the growth of this peer support community over the last about 20 years,
Oh, yeah.
because there's so many thoughts early on that were, I think they were good hearted, that but incredibly naive as to
Yeah.
what. And now you're seeing a lot of peer support programs go away because the peer support was basically built by people who had been through some type of event or incident or a series of events or life altering something that now people are entering in the peer community that have not had that. And I talk to people all across the United States that say, okay, my peer support team is now made up of people who have not been down this road, or it's a challenge because
Yes.
they have great hearts. These people, they want to help, they want to do good,
Yeah.
but
It's
sometimes they
it's
don't
always
have it.
well intentioned. I don't think anybody gets into the peer supporting uh, venue, if you will, without having good intentions. It's not like
Well,
you're
if they do, they don't stay very long.
Yeah.
no, they don't. You're right. So yeah, I mean, and just the changes even in the last 5 years are really encouraging. I mean, I think we still have a long ways to go, and I could go on about that for
Well, it's
another
when you
hour.
see
But
this, the agencies that are changing to wellness programs instead of just a peer team.
yes, yeah.
Now it's actually a robust team of different disciplines and different entities coming together to fulfill
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
totality of a wellness mission.
Yeah, except for sometimes there's too many hands in the pot at
That's
that.
the balance,
Yeah,
right?
at
That's where
that
the
point.
lieutenant thing comes in because you have to have somebody that says no,
Yeah.
Yeah.
no, we're not doing
Yeah, and
this.
at the time they handed it to me, I actually wasn't even a lieutenant. I was just a sergeant, and so I had some hesitation, like could I make this work? And I mean, you don't know until you try, right? I felt like I could make it work. I felt like I had enough contacts and a good enough reputation as a peer supporter that I could maybe make it work. So I started doing. They gave it to me, and I started a 5-year plan and went rocking with it, and it was good because that executive officer job actually provided me the background to be able to have the conversations with the people who have the budget and be able to have it and tailor those conversations in a way that I knew they could understand.
But what does a budget look like for a peer? I've actually never asked this question, and all the podcasts we've ever done, and we ever talked about a peer support budget.
It's pretty minimal. If well, I'm not sorry, Lisa. Go ahead.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
my personal experience on some of that. But go
yeah,
ahead.
I'd love to hear. So when I started out, there was actually a budget, but it was mostly for like educational materials. I
Yeah.
started building a library where I could hand books out to guys because cops are data driven.
Yeah.
They want information. You're not going to tell them anything. They want to see the numbers. I mean, that's part of their job, right? Is to make decisions based on data. So most of mine was literally cab fares, and it was very minimal. It was like 2,000, but when I started going beyond peer support, I wanted to build an actual wellness program. I wanted to have culturally competent, the end goal was to get a staff psychologist or psychiatrist, and trying to sell that to a city, that's 125,000 plus year salaried position. And I knew that we as a city, we as a department were not ready for it, but we had to take baby steps. So, I mean, the good thing that did come out of it is I was already part of those committees. They knew me. I could go in and speak with some familiarity. And then, I taught myself. I learned a lot along the way. I love learning. And so this wellness thing became something I was very passionate about in the first place, but now it's my job to become even more passionate about it. And I did. And I was able to go in and with the help of some allies over at the city, we were able to get a culturally competent employee assistance program specifically for first responders. And that was the first of its kind in Utah, if not some of the surrounding states at the time.
I'm sure
Um,
you're battling Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. I think you. Not a
Yeah,
tough
well,
battle.
Colorado was ahead of us the whole time, and we
Oh, yeah.
tried to use them, but I discovered pretty quickly that for whatever reason, nobody wants us to be compared to Colorado. Politically, it was the weirdest thing, and that's the part I didn't get. I
But
was
they're
never a
out
good
there,
politician.
but they're cutting edge on some of this cultural
Yeah, and so at least
competency.
I had an
There's no doubt.
example, right?
Yeah, they-
But the beauty was we were able to get this completely separate, more visits. The argument was look, if you invest in this now, and that was the way I could get the cities to better understand it, is doing these are your apples, these are my apples, these are how they translate to your apples. The gist of it is this: if you invest in wellness from the beginning, if you invest in having a place where these first responders can go and speak about the very horrific things they see, often on a daily, if not weekly basis, you are going to be saving money down the road in workers' compensation costs because they'll be better equipped to deal with it. They'll have skills to deal with it. You may not. Can you quantify, hey, A plus B doesn't equal PTSD? No, you can't. But we all know, especially now with a lot of the studies that are coming out, if you invest in this wellness as far as giving tools for resiliency and understanding trauma and getting these guys to understand what a critical incident stress response looks like, supervisors understanding that, to be more understanding, caring, and accommodating, then you're gonna come into the back end of it a lot better. And your odds of not having those costs related to sick time particularly are going to be lower. And they said that makes sense. And off we went. And so then, 3 years in, we were making some great progress.
I think to follow that up, I love where you're going with that. I want to return back to your budget question just a second, because I think that's an interesting conversation as well. But your A plus B equals PTSD. I find that historically, I've been working in this field since the 2008 was when I first went through CISM training. And I think most agencies, and I think we should qualify on here as well, you're a large agency.
Yes.
I mean, what is the statistic? 80% of agencies across the United States are 100 or less. I think it's something ridiculously high like that.
Yeah.
So you're unique. I'm unique. My agency large. I think most agency administrators want that equation. Like, I just want you to say 1 + 1 = 2, or A plus B will equal C. And that just does not work in this
not with mental health
community.
Yeah.
Because there's so many variables. There's so many external factors. There's so many things internally going on. People are unique. But for the longest time, CISM was the answer. That's no longer the answer. It's changing. It still is used, but it's a tool. I'm a CISM instructor. I mean, this case up in Washington is turning CISM upside down. It's turning it on its head. I mean, there's a lot of conversation about that, and we get into that another day. But I think that goes back to the budget point, which is, you tell me what A plus B equals, and then you get the money equivalent for it. And it just doesn't have that. And when you were talking, one of the things that jumped out at me was early on, we had to go ask for donation visa cards so we could put a male police officer victim of a domestic violence. She tore his ass up with a frying pan and put him in a hotel, and we had to ask for somebody to pay for it for him.
Right.
I mean, we didn't have the budget for that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we didn't have the budget. That was just out of
you
pocket.
can't talk about that. You can't even tell the chief, hey man, well, if you can't tell me that, then
yeah, and that comes with that transparency with government, right? Everybody wants to know where those dollars go, too.
That's right.
And so that is the challenge with it. When it comes to mental health. It's different. But at the same time, it's a very easy conversation to have with the city, if not the legislature. And this is the way I related it to, I once spoke in front of a committee at the legislature. We were talking specifically about PTSD. I went up in uniform and said, hi, I'm a cop with PTSD, and this is how you're failing our first responders. And the way I related it to them is, I said, at the time, our department spent, to bring in someone brand spanking new to law enforcement, so what we would call a green recruit, to bring them in, train them, get them, equip them, get them through FTO, is the better part of a year in our agency. And it was upwards of a cost of about $90,000 a piece. So we're spending $90,000 to train and equip this police officer to remain physically safe, and we are investing absolutely nothing in their mental wellness. And then you're going to look me in the face and say, but you're fine, you know what you signed up for. Yeah, no, nobody knows what they signed up for. And there's certainly ways to do stress inoculation and resiliency, but as we all know, trauma is very different. We're all human beings, we react to trauma differently. The fact is, first responders face an enormous amount of critical incidents in their career. And it does have an effect. It has to have an effect. Science says it will have an effect. And so we have this kind of like blind spot, not just within the community of law enforcement, but greater than that, the legislatures, the community at large, where mental health right now is a big deal, right? Where cities are throwing a lot of money at the mental health, particularly here locally with the homeless population, mental health and addiction. But then when it comes to law enforcement specifically, it's like, well, you're all superhumans, you should be fine. It's like, no, we're no different. We are no different. Why
Well, you're a
are we
servant.
worth,
You're a
you know,
you're a public
less?
servant, so your needs become much more minimalized in that conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we've seen. That's
Mm.
historical accuracy.
Yeah.
But
Well-
I think now there's an awareness. There's certainly large national organizations like IECP and FOP, National FOP and IFF. They're having these conversations
Finally,
of,
yes.
of what's it going to take to, and I think it started with the suicide problem. And then when they started peeling back the layers of that onion, they realized people don't have to have suicide ideations just to have their lives completely upside down from the job or something critical incident or just the chronic stress of 20 years in this business as a
Yeah.
firefighter or a
Yeah.
paramedic.
I think the awareness is coming. There's just not, I'm still a little disappointed in the backing. I mean, we've had this conversation before. I think you and I did last time, Austin, about what workers' comp is trying to do now, particularly here in the state of Utah. I serve a first responder population now, and one of them recently filed a workers' comp claim, and they denied it on the basis that Utah doesn't cover mental stress claims. It actually said that on the letter, and I was like, that's not even true, number one.
Yeah.
But the sad part is, at least in the state of Utah, we don't have a presumptive condition of post-traumatic stress disorder. All of our surrounding states do, but we don't. We don't have a medical retirement here. So if you are a cop and you go in, even in your first year, and get shot and have a traumatic injury that's bad enough to make it so you can no longer be in law enforcement, you're just done. There's nothing there. And if you have to have 15 surgeries later, they're going to have to fight for the entire thing. If that affects you psychologically, you get nothing. And that's just like, so we're asking these human beings to go out and do these incredible things. And I will say I'm a firm believer that first responders are some of the most resilient people on the planet, because you would not do this job for 20, 30 years if you weren't, because there's no incentive to stay while you're going slowly losing your life like I did, you know?
There is an argument, a viewpoint, not an argument, I guess maybe reframe that to say there is a school of thought that first responders are much more resilient than, say average Joe. And they still, because they take so much coming at them and their breaking point is at a higher level. So there's a school of thought there that says, but no doubt every human has a breaking point where their cup is full,
Yeah.
and it says, okay, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, in some ways, I guess I'm forgiving of the greater public that they truly don't. If they really knew what was going on in their community, like, I think they'd be terrified.
Well, the outward appearance isn't the same.
No, and it's not. And I really don't think it's hard to quantify. Again, it's hard to quantify, like, what does your average police officer or first responder go through in a 20-year career? I recently kind of got stuck on that, and I've actually filed a grandma request because I want to know. I did nothing but fatal accident investigations for 18 years of my career.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen human bodies be torn apart in all kinds of different ways, and a lot of death straight from the time they were dead to right up through dealing with the family into court, right? It's very personal. But now I kind of want to know. Like, I think, Austin, you and I talked last time about what the average is.
Didn't you say like 22,000
Yeah.
bodies is the study you did?
Yeah, and that was just in 1 week. So yeah, before I went to the legislature, that was one thing I ran into this before, when we had the arguments with the city. Like, how do I quantify this for your average person? Like, how do I get them to understand without, like, overtly traumatizing them with gory stories, right? And yeah, I just called up one of our sergeants, said, hey, will you just let me know how many fatals you go on this week? How many deaths? because in our agency, you'll have a sergeant with a squad of 6. Individually, those 6 cops will maybe go on 1 death a week. Well, the sergeant has to go to all 6.
Yeah.
So you have one person who's seeing 6 dead people a week. Well, for him, he's on afternoon shift, one of our busier shifts. It was 3 for like a 2-week period. So I just extrapolated that out and I presented it to the legislature going, hey, I want you to just consider this. These are just dead human beings. In between that, there are screaming human beings, dying human beings, hurt children, arguing people that you've arrested time and time again that still go back to their partners and then they end up killing their partners. There's all that in between, but today we're just talking about how many dead human beings you're asking first responders to see. This is just a minimum for this agency and this sergeant. And it blew their minds. It blew my mind. And so now I'm actually trying to quantify that for my career because now I'm kind of curious. I'm also kind of terrified to find out what it actually is because I think even I probably have minimized because you just get so numb to it, which is sad to say. After a while, that's just a coping mechanism. You just cannot recognize that as a human being until it touches you differently.
I know late in my career, at a command level, I wouldn't go look, even though there were times where it was necessitated that I attend or be present because of some, weird dynamic with the death. I just intentionally would not look at the dead bodies because I was maxed out.
Yeah.
And I knew it. I knew that about myself.
Yeah.
And anyway, I was asked by it one day by one of the lieutenants, and I said, you don't unsee it ever. Some don't bother you, but some do.
Yeah. And I think as your life changes too, I mean, like my career was my entire adult life. I got into it at 23. It's all I knew my entire adult life. And so I changed as a person during that time. My life changed outside the department. And then, I always saw this, and you probably did too, Brad, is, things would change when a young cop finally gets a family. They relate to the children differently.
Oh,
because you have, you have to, or it's a
significant stories.
Yeah, somebody that looks like your grandmother. It's hard to disconnect from that.
Yeah.
And honestly, I still truly believe this. At least it was true for me. As I said before, most people don't get into law enforcement. I mean, there's some that are on, I guess, the power trip, if you will, and they almost always weed themselves out. But most of us get in this career, law enforcement, not just law enforcement, but first responders in general, to help people.
Right.
And so you're helping them because you want to connect on that human level. But then to survive the job, you have to disconnect from that humanity a lot. But it comes out later, whether you want it or not. It's like you said, you've got this bucket and it's constantly being full. It fills up and every once in a while it tips over. And then in cases like mine and some others for the people here that we help at Chateau, is at some point it just tips over and it just keeps spilling. And you don't know what to do with it.
Yep.
And that's
but it's
when
happening earlier in
Yes.
careers than it was previously.
Yeah, which is, I think it's more intense now. I mean, the staffing issues, you've got a lot more different stressors now on law enforcement.
Community issues.
Community issues, domestic terrorism issues. I mean, we were just talking about that before the podcast here. So the stressors have changed, but the sheer number of the horrific things they have to witness by virtue of giving service to their community has an effect. And it's still my firm belief that we are getting better, but we're not doing enough for the first responders. And that's why I'm thankful for my journey at Chateau. And now it's changed again since the last time we did this podcast in the most amazing way. So.
Yeah. So back to the budget. I think if we circle back to the budget piece, because I find that an interesting portion
I
of
have
the
so
conversation.
many things to say about just
well.
money.
Well, because I think it's fascinating because we're going to have we've got a XO here, former XO, that would have a peek into that and a glimpse into that. And I'm curious to see what your time frame is of how they were dispensing money, because if you really know, it doesn't matter what comes out of the chief's mouth. It's irrelevant. Look at the budget. The budget will tell all. It will tell 100% where the priorities are. And, there's a lot of listeners on here. If the 80% rule or whatever that variation of that, are small agencies, most large agencies are not going to throw a ton of money at it. I mean, you're looking at for wellness programs, you're probably looking at maybe a few $100,000 towards a wellness program. Maybe that's including salaries for some of your wellness clinicians or wellness staff.
That would be amazing. Mine was $2,000, and then they took that, and then we had no budget. And I
Right.
went,
Yeah.
"What do you want from me?
Yeah.
Well, and
Like, I can't do what you want me to do with
Well, that's it.
nothing."
So that's that 30,000-foot view. But what they were
Correct.
giving the team leaders would be, 3 digits or 4 digits.
No, so
maybe-
our team leaders ended up being a collateral position. That was when I tapped out, is because it was a full-time position. It is always the peer support coordinator had always been a full-time position. And then we hit, you got to trim your budget, I think is what happened. It didn't become a priority. And the nature of peer support is, and I get it, right? I've been at that 30,000-foot view. You don't talk about your peer support. The people being supported certainly don't talk about it. So what's the assumption? You're not hearing anything, so there must not be anything happening. And you can't really quantify it, even though we did. We would do our total contacts within a
but that
context
doesn't
of
tell
the different.
story, though,
That
right?
doesn't
So
tell you like all the other like midnight phone calls.
Right.
It's just a number, and
right.
we're really great at numbers. But
Yeah.
if the numbers aren't really high and you've never done peer support, how does a chief or a deputy chief really understand what work is being done? So
See, if I did
mean,
a
I get it.
suicide intervention Saturday night. Oh,
Yeah.
good.
Off the books
And
conversations.
what you're not saying is I spent 4 hours, 30 minutes of at the beginning of which he had a gun in his hand and in one hand and a drink in the other, and it was touch and go how this was going to go.
Yeah.
And that takes years off of your life.
Yeah.
So the statistic is,
yeah.
that's just one contact.
Correct. Yeah. So that, I mean,
See-
and so it's hard to quantify in it, and you're not, you have to have those uncomfortable conversations because, as someone who's done it and then also been at the 30,000-foot level, when somebody goes on leave, and you usually know the circumstance behind it. And so if you're a good leader, your natural instinct is say, hey, how's that person doing? And then I have to sit in an elevator with the chief going, hey, so did you watch that Braves game the other day,
Right,
Chief?
because I can't tell you
Yeah,
anything.
because I'm not. You're
I
not
don't
getting
even know
anything
who-
from me.
I don't even know what you're
And
talking
my
about.
department was really good about that. They did respect that, but that by its very nature made it appear like maybe I wasn't being busy enough. I don't really know what the situation was. All I know is that they had a consultation. They decided to go to this hybrid model that was collateral, and they were sending me back to patrol. So now I was supposed to be a full-time patrol sergeant and a full-time coordinator. And I told him, I said, that's not going to work. But I kind of got angry, and I picked up my ball and I left. And 3 months later, I was buried. I was just done. Like, the trauma bucket was over full. I knew I couldn't do it. And so then I had to go in and do one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever had in my career beyond going to a coworker's funeral. And that was to walk in and go, you can have your program back because this isn't working. I can't do this. I'm telling you, this needs to be a full-time position. There was a reason why it was a full-time position before. You're telling me you want me to build this program, but you're not giving me the tools to do it, which you would hope as a leader they would hear that. Like, that's your job as a supervisor, right? What do you need to complete this? Now I get it. Then we get back to that budget thing. What do you need to do it? And if the money's not there, the money's not there. But I had to, for the first time ever, and it still feels selfish even telling this story, to say, no, I need to pick me. You've chosen, like, you want me to go be patrol sergeant? I'm going to go be the best patrol sergeant you have, because I cannot do both of these. And I had to walk away from my own program knowing full well that it probably was going to undo everything I had just built. And it did to some extent.
Would you qualify that as a betrayal? Does that fall
Absolutely.
out? Okay.
Yeah, it was a
Wow.
betrayal. It was it was a big betrayal, and it was one of the most hurtful things that ever happened, because I'm being told one thing, but the actions weren't there. And that was what was frustrating with the budget, is you're being told constantly, oh yeah, we believe in this, we want you to keep doing it, but yeah, we're not giving you
All
any
the
money. And
All
that's
the
hard.
money.
That's hard for a first responder too, because we pay way more attention to your actions than your words, because we're used to being lied to all the time.
That's what happens on the streets.
Correct. And so we're going to pay more attention to your actions. So if your actions are not aligning with your words, then there is inherently going to be some distrust, and it's not a good situation.
The
So.
street officer's viewpoint. the
Yeah.
trooper, the deputy.
Sure.
I hear what's coming out of your mouth, but I also saw how you handled that call, and this is what's up. And
Yeah.
this is my belief structure surrounding. Yes,
So-
that's a very raw baseline.
And I do
model.
want to get back to you, Austin, on this because I know you have a perspective because you're having those larger conversations within the wellness community outside Chateau. Is how are we getting with the budget situation? Does it seems like we're making some progress, but I don't know that it's specific to first responders. Is that perception remotely accurate?
Well,
At this point?
there's some personal issues that I have with just treatment in general because in the public space, just because when you look and someone says, "Well, I'm paying your salary," right? How many times has someone said that to you?
Oh, all the time.
All
I
the time.
I kept
Yeah.
change in my pocket
Yeah.
to flip at them for that very reason.
Yeah. So
Yeah, here's
you
your
know,
money back.
so they're paying your salary, but when you guys need treatment or help, it's unbelievable, right? And Medicaid across all the states is available, right? So they're also paying money for the homeless population to receive treatment all the time.
Yeah.
But how dare you guys go
Right.
and look for that? So that's a personal issue that I have a problem with.
How many agencies? I'm curious. How many agencies have spent out of pocket money to help their people come here?
Never a police department. There's been a sheriff's office that has done it. Never a police department. Fireside, however, all the time.
Yeah.
All.
Yeah.
They're IFF. They just the union itself is a little bit more upfront and makes treatment accessible. But and we're talking money. We're not talking big money here. Like we're talking a plane flight. We're talking we're not talking $40,000-$50,000.
maybe
Yeah.
1,000.
Yeah. So, but
Yeah.
a police department that is not sheriff, no, never.
So then
So we
let's.
find that. Sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
So I'm just curious then if we're going to play apples to oranges. So what is the average cost for a 30-day inpatient treatment? 40?
Are they using insurance or no?
Let's just say just cost.
Well, I think
Bottom line, total cost.
5,000.
5,000?
Yeah.
For one individual to go through 30
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
See, that's
So
for an
that's
out of pocket.
Yeah, for out of pocket, we'll say $1,000 to $1,500 for flights, and because they're
Yeah.
only out there.
But the actual bona fide cost to a facility like Chateau, what is the overall cost of a 30-day program? It's more like with the salaries probably 40 to 50, yeah?
Are you saying like what is
What is the true cost of a 30-day
for us to
treatment
run it?
program? Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
administrative side.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a difficult question. Majority of the time, it's going to cost overhead 15 to 20,000.
Yeah.
Somebody.
Yeah. And so the reason I ask that
Or more
is
sometimes.
when you look at that in the scheme of a total budget of a police department or a city, that is peanuts.
Yeah, it really is.
Peanuts. I mean, so let's just put it in the context of what I said before relative to my former department. So you're talking $20,000 is what, 1/20th of the cost of training one police officer to be physically safe and ready to go.
That's the argument though that nobody has figured out truly how to make. So people have tried across the country.
And I get that. I get that, but that's the conversations we should be having.
Well,
right?
You know that they are paying for it. So if you think about it this way, the bigger departments, they are self-funded policies.
I guess that's true. Yeah.
So they are technical. Well, and that's the crazy thing about it.
My agency is self-funded.
But the crazy thing about it is they could actually work out a number, and if they partnered with the union and said, hey, like the 6 facilities across the country, I want to get a set cost. Actually, be cheaper than using their insurance a majority of the time.
Mm-hmm.
At letting a third-party administrator run their insurance,
Mm-hmm.
Like a Blue Cross Blue Shield or something like that. It would actually be cheaper for them to just say, well, when my guy needs treatment, I'm going to cover flights and their, self-pay cost, and that's it. And it would be cheaper than what it would be to go through insurance.
Yeah. And see, those are the conversations that are not
But
that
I
are
think
not
we're
happening.
talking about one specific entity. I think there's the wellness, and specifically if you're talking about prevention type. I mean that's a whole nother door of the conversation.
Yeah,
which
they're two
is,
different things for sure.
I was reactive.
I think it's multiple. I don't think it's just two different things. I think treatment's a component of the wellness program, therapy, prevention, training, education. I mean, there's so many. It's a very complex conversation, especially when you start talking about budget that nobody's wanted to throw money at before.
Indeed. Yeah. I mean, that's why I
Mm.
brought that up, is because if you're trying to, say to a person who runs a budget, like, okay, what am I saving at the back end? What am I
Well,
saving 10 years later? And
it's
that's the part that's hard to quantify, because
it's
you
never
get to the point where, say I am, where my PTSD isn't going away. I have a permanent partial disability because of my PTSD. I had to leave the job because of my PTSD. They're basically own me for the rest of my natural life while I need treatment, and I will need treatment to function.
yeah,
I
but
Right.
worked with a
So
guy,
how do you measure that ahead of time? And that's, I think, where
you're not
it
talking to
gets muddy.
first responders about this money though. You're talking to city managers.
I know.
So that's a completely different conversation.
Totally.
Like, you're not talking to a chief, which is, I think some people don't get, is you're not actually talking to somebody who's in charge of saying yes or no. That's
And
a
they're
first
still
even
not
some
responder.
in charge of
chiefs,
saying yes or
even
no.
some of the chiefs, some of the executive leadership have not spent any really deep, quality, heart wrenching time on the streets to know what that perspective is.
No, that's true. And I mean, this just that you said, like, I think you hit the nail on the head, Brad, is it's a much broader conversation, because we can talk about budgets. We can talk about wellness from the wellness and the peer support component. And then we can talk about the treatment component, which is the three of us in this room fully understand that by the time a first responder gets to the point where they are seeking inpatient treatment, it's bad.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's bad
Wheels
because
are off.
there's the stigma associated with seeking help as a first responder.
Sure.
And that is reinforced all the time in media, at the legislative level, when they're
Well,
not
no, I think
listening and they're willing to throw money for other populations. And even the mental health space as well. I remember very much a conversation probably 4 years ago I had with a local treatment facility that we were looking at. They wanted to start a program that was similar to one that the military was running, that was very good. And they said that they just had this epiphany one day, that they realized somehow that they had not ever considered that the first responder community
needed it.
needed
Right.
trauma help. And it actually blew their minds that they had never actually considered it, and they were trauma professionals. And that really said something to me, like, what part of it are we missing in the profession? Are we missing an opportunity to say, hey, we love our community. We're willing to literally sacrifice not just our lives, but our souls to serve this community, but we're being forgotten. How do we rehumanize that? And I think that became very difficult since 2020, right? Because we have this shift where you're robots. We want you to not be robots, but now we want you to be robots again.
I remember having this conversation when the Take a Knee thing came out.
Yeah.
With several people, leaders in the community leaders. I remember having this conversation that we have been forgotten long ago. That, there's not a, January 9 is Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. If you don't know that, there's a reason why, because nobody gives a shit.
Yeah.
Only big stuff. September 11th, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Right.
I think those
And
are it.
I'm not sitting here doing the woe is me thing, but back to the budget piece, follow the money, because the totality of it is not just treatment. I mean, yes, sadly there's a need for treatment for people who have the A plus B equals PTSD equation. But there's also people who they just need a therapy check-in frequently, and that's
Yeah.
going to fill their need, but
Yeah.
they're not getting it.
Yeah, that's why
Or
we did the
there's
EAP.
Or there's a peer support component, and they're not getting it because
Yeah.
they don't have budget for a peer support program, or they
Yeah.
don't have, the reality is, if you're listening out here and you're sharing in our woe is me session, or our little sympathy session of there's no money to this, I was raised through the peer program where we had to go find money that, well, the cold reality is, I built and ran my own successful nonprofit, and you know why I was good at fundraising is because I'd already been doing fundraising.
You knew how to beg.
I knew how to beg.
Yeah.
I knew how to ask for money for somebody else. I didn't know how to ask for money for me. I had to learn how to do that. But that component of, hey, we have a need. Well, don't you have money in your budget? No, we don't.
Yeah.
I mean, they
that
figure
is,
out a way
yeah.
to you know, you can fill in the blank, pay for all these other extravagant things, but to pay for a therapy visit for Lisa,
Yeah.
no, I don't.
I mean,
no.
that's one thing that kind of shifted with us that was really
We
kind
can
of
blame the community all we want,
sure.
but within our own ranks, we have people who say you don't need that.
Correct. And that's still a problem. I think it is getting better just from the perspective that the newer generations are raised a little bit differently as far as mental health wellness. They're more open to it, right? That doesn't mean they're supported when they seek it, because you still have the stigma associated with this warrior culture of ours that is there for a reason. I mean, it's there for a reason, right? But yeah, there's a lot of barriers. I'm not sure what what we can do to chip away at them very much. But we one thing that was really heartwarming when we did get that second EAP for first responders is it actually was not even, I won't say they caved, but they came to us halfway with this idea. Like, hey, we want to do this separate EAP because we now, after some of us being vulnerable enough to say, hey, I have PTSD, this is how it affects me as a cop, but I'm still a productive employee. I hope you value that as a city, right? And they did. And so they outwardly came forward and said, okay, we recognize that what you see on a daily basis as a group, a work group, is far different than the rest of the city. We're going to do this separate thing. How do we make that work? Because we had talked about the stigma. And so it ended up being 15 visits versus 8. And you can do it multiple times for every incident. And as far as I know, it's still been going very well. And that was a game changer. I really wish I still had the numbers, because I wanted to know what the utilization was after the first 6 months. And as I remember, the only comment I got back from the city was we were blowing it out of the water. So with the help of the city, they came to us halfway and they helped build this thing that's still there. And it's available. And I don't know how many other cities actually have a separate employee assistance program for their first responders. Now, that being said, we did have some stumbles out of the gate. We've talked before about how important it is to have a culturally competent therapist. And some of the stumbles out of the gate was we need to vet some people, because there were a few where they would go to them, and quite frankly, we probably traumatized some therapists that, again, there was this, there's just no idea what we see. I think it really, now that I've had time to reflect for 2 years on my 30-year experience, I'm seeing the totality of it. It's kind of mind-blowing and somewhat disturbing on some days. Like, wow, this is a lot. This is a lot as a human being. And it's still, see, look at this. I'm even getting emotional at it right now. Wow. So, yeah, I mean,
That's
just
human, though.
What's that?
That's human, though.
That is being human.
Appreciate you being human.
Yeah, thanks. It's what made me a good cop, being human. What makes first
what made
responders
you be a good person, Lisa? Come on.
Be a good human.
Yeah.
A good person, not just a good cop.
Aw, thanks, you guys.
You have a great heart. Well, that was a good conversation.
Yeah, that went for a lot longer than I thought.
I checked the time there, so we probably need to do a little wrap up. Lisa, thanks so much for coming on. You're always a pleasure to visit with, and your perspective's amazing, and we wish you the best. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Austin.
Thank you.
Chateau Health and Wellness is a 16-bed treatment facility nestled in the foothills of the Wasatch Mountains in Midway, Utah. Chateau's First Responder Resiliency Program is designed to treat the unique challenges and issues that first responders encounter in the course of their careers. Chateau's comprehensive and highly individualized approach to treatment addresses more than just the presenting issues. It addresses the why. Each of their seasoned, trauma-trained, and culturally competent therapists utilize evidence-based, specialized therapies to treat trauma at its core, and enable clients to begin the healing process while developing a resilient and healthy relationship with stress. Chateau Health and Wellness is trusted by departments and agencies from around the country to treat responders and veterans. In fact, it is one of only a handful of facilities nationwide that is vetted and approved to treat members of the Fraternal Order of Police. For more information or to speak to a representative, go to chateaurecovery.com or call 888-507-5031.